I used to believe marriages fell apart with a bang, some spectacular scene that left neighbors whispering and the dog hiding under the bed. Mine unraveled with quiet decisions. The kind you make while cleaning pasta sauce off the stove or sitting in traffic at a yellow light you should have run. We had a house outside Columbus, 2 kids who collected soccer medals and library cards, and a schedule so color-coded it looked like confetti. I wore the same navy jacket to parent-teacher nights because it felt steady. Steady was my thing. If you asked me then, I would have said steadiness made a home safe. Turns out, it also makes you an easy villain. She told me I was boring over breakfast like it was weather. You don't try, Marissa said, stirring yogurt she never ate. You get home, you talk about utility bills, you fall asleep to documentaries about bridges. She smiled, like it was charming to watch a spouse turn into a rut. The kids had already left for school. I'd packed their lunches with little notes, cheesy stuff, puns only a dad would write. And that morning, I'd added a 20 to our daughter's field trip envelope because the choir teacher said there'd be a museum gift shop. The mortgage, the commute, the lunches, the notes, those were my ways of loving. I told her that. She shrugged and said, "Love needs surprise." I tried surprise. I brought home sunflowers even though she didn't like how big the petals were. I booked a babysitter and drove us to a jazz lounge downtown because an article said couples who listen to live music get along better. We made it to the second song before she said she felt tired. We left early. She scrolled her phone all the way home, the screen lighting her face in pale blue. That soft glow used to mean she was reading recipes. Later I learned it meant something else. I work in logistics for a company that moves medical equipment. I like order, tracking numbers, the satisfaction of knowing a machine reaches a hospital on time. Numbers don't lie. They also can't keep a promise, which is how I missed the first clue. A hotel charge tagged to the credit card we rarely used, the one tucked in the back of the drawer for emergencies. It showed up on a Tuesday. When I asked, she laughed and said she'd booked a room for a self-care day. She said baths and room service felt decadent, and she deserved a treat. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be a husband who appreciated a bubble bath. 2 weeks later, our son brought me a letter from the bank addressed to account holder Guardian. His voice was proud because he'd learned the word guardian in civics. The letter said, "Our 529 college plan required a beneficiary update because of unusual activity." My heart did a strange hiccup. I'd started those accounts the day we brought the kids home from the hospital, $20 a month at first, then more when annual raises allowed it. I had a chart on my laptop with projections. The graph line climbed like a promise. I called the bank on my lunch break, the same lunch break during which I ate a turkey sandwich in my car because the break room smelled like reheated fish. The representative spoke with a calm, scripted tone until she reached the part about withdrawals initiated by the secondary account holder. The names on the form included mine and hers. Over the last month, multiple transfers had been made to our joint checking account, then flowed out by debit card to what the ledger called hospitality vendors. I asked for the vendors by name. She read them. 2 were the same hotel as the first charge. One was a place near the interstate with a billboard that boasted hot waffles and clean rooms. I felt like somebody had pulled the emergency brake inside my chest. I drove home early. On the way, every red light lasted years. When I reached the house, she was at the kitchen island with a laptop open, a candle burning something named after a coastal town. She looked calm, rested, like the ads for spa water pitchers. I showed her the statement. She closed the computer with a gentle click, as if she'd been waiting for this scene and wanted to stage it correctly. "It's not what you think," she said, then followed it with the sentence nearly every movie has taught us never to trust. "And even if it is, can you blame me?" She spoke with a lawyer's rhythm, which was funny because her degree was in marketing. The script went like this. I was dull. I didn't take her anywhere. She felt invisible. She said she had needs, and she delivered that word like it wore a silk robe. She said the kids would be fine because financial aid exists, because not everyone goes to college, because life is flexible. Her voice had a brightness that didn't match the carpet under our feet. She called what we'd saved hoarding for later, and asked, almost sweetly, "When does later begin?" I asked who the man was. I said his name could help at least blunt the blow. She smiled without teeth and said, "No one special." That phrase landed harder than anything else because it meant I'd been displaced by nothing in particular. She said this wasn't about romance, it was about feeling alive. She compared me to a beige wall and said he was a splash of paint. I didn't recognize the person speaking. I still saw the woman I met in line at the DMV, the one who joked that our first date would be at the least miserable place under fluorescent lights. She used to be the funniest person I knew. I slept on the couch that night and pretended the cushions didn't hurt my back. The next morning I called a lawyer, a quiet woman named Michaels who had the patience of a school counselor. She listened, asked me to email the bank records, and said, "Before anything else, protect the kids' accounts, remove her authorization." We drove to the bank together after work, because I didn't trust my hands not to shake during the meeting. The banker printed paperwork. I signed like I was signing for air. Michaels explained how Ohio views marital assets, what the court considers when there's dissipation. She used that word, dissipation, like a sponge leaking water. She said hotel receipts tied to withdrawals from accounts earmarked for education looked particularly bad. She also said to breathe and not turn into a TV character who makes dramatic speeches in grocery store aisles. Judges care about stability, she said. Keep doing what you do best. So I did. I made breakfast. I packed lunches. I took our son to practice and our daughter to choir rehearsal. I wrote a long email to their guidance counselor about scholarship timelines because just seeing those words felt like a defense. I also began to notice details I'd ignored. Perfume on days with no plans, suddenly expensive handbags that arrived in dust bags like small coffins, phone calls that ended when I entered the room. Every new fact clicked into a mosaic I wanted to smash. I asked if she would attend counseling. She said couples therapy was a performance and that she'd already performed long enough. The next day, a notification pinged, another hotel charge. I sat in the driveway after work and watched the maple tree throw shadows across the hood of my car. My hands felt cold even though it was June. I knew then that I wasn't dealing with a crack in a window. The frame had rotted. Michaels filed for temporary orders. She asked for exclusive access to the remaining college funds under my name and for a financial freeze on joint accounts until a hearing. The paperwork felt sterile. Words like wasteful spending and marital misconduct lived in lines that looked like they belonged to someone else. She told me to stay civil. She told me to keep records. She told me to resist the urge to argue late at night because exhaustion makes fools. At home, my wife oscillated between charm and contempt. One night, she made chicken piccata and set the table as if for a magazine shoot. She poured wine we'd been saving for our 10th anniversary. She said we could be friends. She said we could modernize our marriage, that arrangements exist where people share houses while allowing adventures. I thought about the kids, our son who still put dinosaurs on the windowsill, our daughter who kept a scrapbook of college campuses she wanted to visit. I said no. She laughed in a way that didn't sound like laughter. The kids felt the shift even though we spoke carefully. Our daughter asked if everything was okay. I told her the most honest sentence I could manage. Things are changing, but I'm here. She nodded, too grown for 15. That night, I stood in the hallway and listened to them talk through the wall about math homework and a friend who'd moved away. The normal sound steadied me more than any adult advice. When the hearing date arrived, summer cicadas hummed like distant power lines. We sat on opposite benches with space between us that wasn't entirely about furniture. She wore a dress I recognized from a work party years ago, when she'd stood next to me and made jokes about executives who used buzzwords. Now, she whispered to a man I didn't know, her attorney, who had an expensive watch and a pen he kept uncapping as if he needed it to breathe. The judge's nameplate looked carved from a block of certainty. Michaels made measured arguments. She presented copies of bank statements, hotel receipts, and screenshots from the college accounts portal. She didn't punt for drama. She spoke like someone reading weather alerts, clear, informative, firm. My wife's attorney tried a different angle. He leaned into the word neglect, as if my careful routines were a form of abandonment. He said I spent money on hobbies, meaning my weekend woodworking projects that sometimes brought in grocery cash. He used phrases like emotional famine. He said hotel stays were escapes from an oppressive monotony. I wanted to object that I had made pancakes every Saturday, and that boredom wasn't a legal category. Through it all, I kept my eyes on the judge. I remembered what Michaels had said. Judges care about stability. I thought about our son's soccer cleats lined up by the door and our daughter's sheet music taped above her desk. I thought about the number of sandwiches I'd made, the miles I'd driven, and the fact that none of it was glamorous enough to fit on a billboard. I also thought about the line on that graph I loved, rising like a train track through years of dinners and checkups and birthdays. When my wife took the stand, she called me dependable, then used dependable like a synonym for static. She said she felt trapped by routines. She said she didn't mean to hurt anyone, which sounded like a speech pulled from a podcast. She admitted to the withdrawals, but said she considered them temporary reallocations. When asked where the money had gone, she said, experiences, as if experiences could be refunded. The judge listened, expression unmoved. The hearing stretched. At one point, a bailiff's shoe squeaked, and the sound echoed like a punctuation mark. My heart pounded so loudly I worried it was audible, but I sat up straight and pictured the kids' faces. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a calendar reminder to pay the electric bill. Even during the unraveling, life kept throwing small duties at me. I took comfort in the mundane. By late afternoon, we were still waiting for the judge's decision on the temporary orders, the first real turning point, Michaels had said. The courtroom windows threw rectangles of light across the floor as the sun shifted. My wife drummed her fingers on her knee. Her attorney whispered something that made her mouth tighten. I folded my hands and focused on breathing slowly, counting to 5, then 7, then 5 again because our daughter once taught me that pattern to calm nerves before recitals. The judge cleared his throat, and the room hushed so fast it felt like someone had lowered a dimmer switch. He looked down at the papers, then up at us with a stare that held the weight of years of other broken stories. His voice came steady, even. He began to speak, and the first sentences would decide whether the kids' college accounts remained safe or whether the chaos would keep spreading like a cracked windshield on a cold morning. The judge's voice carried that practiced calm that fills courtrooms, neither kind nor cruel, just precise. He spoke about evidence, responsibility, and something he called fiduciary breach, words that sounded too formal for what had really happened. In simple terms, he said the money taken from the children's accounts was an act of misuse, not misunderstanding. He granted me full custodianship over what remained of those funds and placed temporary financial restrictions on my wife. I didn't cheer, didn't smile, just nodded because the victory felt like surviving a storm, not winning a race. When we left the courthouse, she walked ahead, her heels clicking like punctuation. Outside, the air smelled of summer rain and hot asphalt. She turned once, maybe to say something, but instead just shook her head and got into her car. For the first time in months, I didn't follow or explain. I just stood there under the courthouse steps while the lawyer patted my shoulder and said, "That's a good first step. Keep doing what you're doing." At home, the kids were waiting. I didn't tell them everything, just said the judge wanted to make sure their college money was safe. Our daughter looked at me the way kids do when they already know more than you think. She said quietly, "Did Mom mess up?" I didn't answer that directly. I told her grown-ups sometimes make mistakes when they forget what really matters. She nodded and went back to helping her brother build a Lego tower. Watching them, I realized the tower looked sturdier than anything in my marriage had felt in years. The next few weeks were strange. Marissa moved into an apartment across town. Modern, minimal, one of those places with too much glass and not enough curtains. We traded messages about schedules and school pickups. Her tone swung between cold and overly cheerful. She still insisted she hadn't done anything that bad. I kept my replies brief and polite because every lawyer and every late-night article said civility wins custody cases. I learned to live with silence in the evenings, the kind where the refrigerator hum becomes company. Then something unexpected happened. I started sleeping better. The house felt lighter, not because it was happier, but because there was no longer the constant tension of waiting for another lie to fall apart. I fixed the squeaky step, cleared out the cluttered drawers, even started cooking dinners that didn't come from a microwave. The kids noticed. One night my son said, "You're less tired now." He was right. I had been carrying exhaustion disguised as marriage. Meanwhile, Marissa kept testing boundaries. She posted smiling photos with captions about freedom and new beginnings, as if hashtags could rewrite what happened. Friends reached out quietly, some in shock, others pretending neutrality. I didn't argue or defend. The truth had a way of surfacing without my help. The second court date came faster than expected. This time it was about custody and property division. Michaels prepared everything like a chess master. She told me to stay calm, no matter what was said. Judges respect composure, she reminded me. So I sat through hours of testimony where my marriage was dissected like a biology lesson. Her lawyer painted her as a woman starved for affection, a victim of monotony. They described my routine as suffocating. I wanted to laugh at the irony, how consistency, the very thing that kept our home running, had become their evidence of neglect. Then, Michaels stood. She didn't dramatize. She simply displayed the hotel receipts, the bank transfers, the dates that overlapped with supposed self-care weekends. She asked one question that hung heavy in the courtroom. If she was escaping boredom, why use her children's future to pay for it? That silence that followed said more than any witness could. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I said marriage wasn't about constant excitement. It was about showing up. I said I wasn't perfect, but I'd never once spent a cent meant for our kids on myself. I told the court that I wanted stability for them, not revenge. And I meant it. By the time closing statements ended, Marissa wouldn't look at me. The judge took his notes, said he'd deliver a ruling soon, and left the room. The air felt thick with endings. Outside, her attorney whispered something to her that made her shoulders stiffen. She finally met my eyes and said, "You're really going to take everything, aren't you?" I told her quietly, "No, just what's right." The ruling came 2 weeks later. Primary custody awarded to me, shared visitation for her, and full reimbursement of the misused funds once the investigation into her withdrawals was complete. It wasn't triumph, it was balance restored. The judge even commended me for maintaining composure. The day I told the kids, I expected tears. Instead, they both hugged me. My daughter said, "So we stay here?" I said yes. My son asked if we could get a dog now that things were normal. We did. A small rescue named Buddy, who snored louder than any human I'd met. Marissa called occasionally, mostly about visitation or logistics. She apologized once, quietly, over the phone. I didn't hate her. I'd just run out of space for her chaos. People assume revenge is loud, but mine came in quiet ways. Sleeping peacefully, laughing with my kids, watching my life rebuild itself piece by piece. The house, once full of tension, became warm again. I started playing guitar after dinner, something I hadn't done since college. The kids joined in, clapping offbeat, Buddy barking along. The laughter echoed through rooms that had known too many arguments. One evening, while cleaning up the dishes, I looked at the empty chair across from me and realized I didn't feel bitter anymore. I felt free. Not the kind of freedom people post about online, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing when everything tried to pull you toward anger. That was my revenge, not taking her down, but standing back up. The judge's decision landed like a steady heartbeat, calm, final, and fair. He ruled that the college funds would stay under my control and that Marissa was responsible for reimbursing what she'd taken. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled for the first time in months. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed from a recent rain. She brushed past me without speaking, her perfume lingering longer than her presence. For a second, I almost pitied her. Then I remembered the bank statements, the lies, the look in our daughter's eyes when she'd asked if Mom was coming home. Pity didn't fit anymore. Back home, the kids sat at the table doing homework. They didn't ask about the ruling, only if I could make pancakes for dinner. I said yes. The room filled with the sound of a whisk, the smell of vanilla, and something that almost felt like peace. Over the next few weeks, I built a new rhythm. Mornings started earlier, dinners ran longer, and laughter returned. Slowly at first, like testing an old radio that still worked. Marissa called sometimes, mostly to argue about schedules or to ask how I could turn the kids against her. I didn't argue back. I'd learned silence was stronger than any defense. The second hearing, about custody, was different. Her lawyer tried to paint me as dull, predictable, emotionally distant. Michaels calmly placed evidence on the table. Statements, receipts, timelines that spoke for themselves. When I finally testified, I said I wasn't exciting, but I was dependable. That I believed kids need roots, not roller coasters. The courtroom stayed quiet except for the scribbling of pens. When the judge announced his decision, primary custody to me, shared visitation for her, Marissa stared at the floor. I didn't feel victory. I felt closure. That night, the kids and I watched a movie. The dog curled at our feet. My son fell asleep halfway through, my daughter resting her head on my shoulder. I looked around our living room and realized revenge wasn't about making someone hurt. It was about rebuilding without them. Peace, I learned, is the best kind of justice.